Hey guys, it's Luke Yon, and today I am going to be talking about my favorite books of 2021, my top 10 books of the year. I was originally going to combine this with my worst books of the year, but I just decided to film them as separate videos, so you're going to get two videos in the span of a couple of days. But I have 10 books here that I want to talk about that I rated 5 out of 5 stars. Last year, it worked out pretty well because I only rated 10 books 5 stars that weren't rereads and everything. I do have 7 honorable mentions though, so I'm just going to go through those pretty quickly. The first one being Instant Karma by Marissa Meyer. This is a YA contemporary novel that follows a girl named Prudence who is very type A, and she is part of a lab group in her class with a boy named Quint who is the total opposite. He's kind of lazy, and she really doesn't like him, and they end up failing their project, and she ends up trying to convince him to work with her over the summer to turn in a new project so that they can get a better grade. And while this happens, she also ends up getting injured and finds out that she has the ability to cast instant karma on people, so she can snap their fingers when she sees someone doing a bad deed and they will be punished for it. And also at this time she finds out that Quint and his mother actually run this animal rescue center for sea animals, and she ends up being involved in that. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in this book. It's very difficult to describe, but I really liked it. I went in with pretty low expectations because I hadn't heard the best things, but I ended up really enjoying it. I'm a huge fan of Marissa Meyer, and she definitely came through with this contemporary book, and I do hope that she writes some more in the future. And yeah, I thought this was really fun, and even though the plot kind of sounds very odd and mishmashed, it worked really well for me. Then I have Lore by Alexandra Bracken. This is a YA fantasy standalone that takes place in kind of an alternate New York City. And basically in this book, every 7 years for 7 days, these Greek gods walk the earth as mortals, and the descendants of the ancient Greek heroes can fight them, and if they defeat them, then they will kind of get their divinity and attain their god status. And in the next Agon, which is the thing that is every 7 years for 7 days, they will be the ones that are hunted. And the book follows a girl named Lore, who is the descendant of Perseus, who slew Medusa, and it is the Agon. And in the last Agon, her entire family was murdered, but in this one, she ends up finding a wounded Athena on her doorstep who asks Lore if she can bind her fate to hers. And also while this is happening, there's a god rising up, and she also runs into an old friend named Castor, and who she thought was dead. So again, this is kind of difficult to describe, and also I read it in April, so it's been quite a minute. But I did really like this book. I read it when I was kind of just not in the best state, and it really picked me up, and I really liked it for that. It wasn't perfect. I do think that there could have been some more things to make it better, but it was really great, and I do really like Alexandra Bracken. My next honorable mention is Skyhunter by Marie Lu. This is another YA fantasy book. It's the first in a duology, and it follows a girl named Talon who is a part of this band of elite warriors called Strikers, who are trying to defeat these monsters that were created by something called the Karenza Federation, which has taken over all the nations in this world except for the one that Talon lives in, called Mara. And in this book, she ends up kind of acquainting herself with a prisoner that enters the Striker headquarters, and she ends up learning more about the Karenza Federation and tries to get retribution against them. And I really liked this book. I love Marie Lu. I loved Talon as a main character. She is mute, so she can't speak, but that doesn't make her any less strong, and I really loved the messages of this story and how it reflected the immigrant experience. So yeah, I really liked this book, and I thought it was definitely great. Again, not perfect, that's why it's in my honorable mentions and not my top 10, but I do think, again, that it was really solid. Then I have These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is another YA fantasy book that takes place in Shanghai in the 1920s, and it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling. So our two main characters are Juliet and Roma. Roma is a part of the White Flowers, which is a gang in Russia, and Juliet is a part of the Scarlet Gang, which is a kind of almost mafia business that runs throughout Shanghai, and they end up kind of joining together, and there's this monster that has run loose in Shanghai. I really liked this book. Once again, it wasn't perfect. There were some things that I wish were different. I do think it was a little bit slow, and I also think the gore was a little bit unnecessary. But again, I thought it was really, really great, and I cannot wait to get to the second book in the series. Then I had The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. This is a kind of like spin-off slash continuation of the Truly Devious series, which is one of my absolute favorite series of all time. That was a trilogy that dealt with like a certain mystery case, and this is a standalone that deals with another one, but we still follow the main character, Stevie Bell, who ends up going to this camp called Camp Wonderfalls, which was struck with a horrible tragedy in the 1970s, I believe, or is it the 1980s? I cannot remember. 1978. Okay, so yeah. And basically, some other things start happening, and she has to solve it. I really liked this book. I don't think it was as good as the Truly Devious series, and I do think that the mystery, especially in this book, there was like something that happened at the end that really bothered me, because it was like you would never have been able to figure out the like culprit without like a chapter like near the end of the book. So that was a little bit cheap to me, but I do think that still this was a really well constructed mystery, and I cannot wait for more Stevie Bell books in the future. Then I have books 2 and 3 in the Conqueror Saga by Kirsten White. I have Now I Rise. I do have an Arc of Bright Reborn, but it's not in this room with me. This series is a gender-bent reimagining of the life of Vlad the Impaler, so we follow Lotta, who is Vlad the Impaler if he had been born a girl, and also the brother to Vlad the Impaler / Lotta, who is named Radu. And in the first book, they are taken from their home in Wallachia and brought to the Ottoman camps, and they end up meeting the son of the Sultan named Mehmed. And this book in particular deals with the fall of Constantinople, and then the third book kind of is like wrapping things up. And, you know, I can't really say, but I absolutely love this series. I think that there are some things that definitely could have been shortened, and I think these books could easily be like 50 pages shorter. And I think also the inclusion of Mehmed's point of view would have really brought the series up to a full 5 stars for me, but I still think it's really great, and I definitely think you should pick it up. And then last for my honorable mentions is a book that I originally rated 5 stars, but I did lower it after I finished it like a couple months after, and that is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book is going to be very hard to describe. It follows the 4 children of Mikariva, who was one of the husbands that Evelyn Hugo married in the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And they're all famous for kind of different reasons, and every year at the end of summer they have this party, and basically at the beginning of the book you find out that Malibu catches fire, where the house is, and the first part is like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. when the party starts, and you also get interstitial chapters from the past when the family was like, you know, like from years past. And then the second part of the book is from 7 p.m. when the party starts to 7 a.m. when it ends. And it's kind of like, you know, it's the beginning is like building up the family and their dynamic, and then the second half is like a slow progression where you're really stressed out because you know that the house is going to catch fire, but you don't know who. And it's really, really great. I really loved it, but upon reflection, I do think that it's not a full 5 stars. I am going to reread it this year, probably in the summertime, because I think it's a great summer book. But I do think that it was just a little bit below like a 5 stars for me. Okay, now moving on to my top 10. I'm going to start with like number 10 and then move up to my favorite book of the year. So number 10, I have This Woven Kingdom by Tahira Mafi. This is actually an arc that I read. The book doesn't come out until February 1st, but I was lucky enough to get an arc, and I absolutely loved this book. I do really want to reread it when it comes out and I get the actual finished copy, because I feel like it might enhance my reading experience. But the first time I read it, it was just ebook because it was an e-arc. But this book follows a girl named Alize, who is kind of like the long-lost princess to this Jinn kingdom. And we also follow Kamran, who is the crown prince to like the kingdom that they live in. And basically they end up their lives kind of end up weaving together, and it's kind of difficult to describe because this book doesn't have much of a plot to it, but that's not, like that didn't bother me at all. Like, I loved the slow progression of this book. It's definitely slow burning, but I loved the characters. I think Alize and Kamran were such good protagonists, and I loved them, and I was just waiting for the moment when they would finally get together. And the writing in this book is probably the best writing I've read this entire year. It's so good. Tahira Mafi, brought up her game in this book. It was so good. I loved the fantasy world that this takes place in. It's like a Persian-inspired world, and the book is also loosely inspired by the Shahnameh, which is an epic poem from that like deals with Persian mythology, and I loved that. I just love Tata Mafi. She's one of my favorite authors, and she definitely like solidified herself with this book, and I cannot wait for the next book in the series. The ending will leave you gasping. It's so good. I absolutely loved this book. Then at number 9, I have a finale to one of my favorite series of all time, and that is The Bronzed Beasts by Roshni Chokshi. I have an entire spoiler-filled reading vlog for this book, so if you want to see more of my in-depth thoughts and like my spoilery opinions on this book, definitely go check that out. But I absolutely loved this book. It's definitely my least favorite in the series. I do think that The Gilded Wolf and the Silver Serpents are a little bit better than this book, but the ending of this book absolutely broke me. Like the epilogue, I'm still thinking about it like all the time, and I think it was just the absolute perfect way to wrap up this series. I love the characters, I love Roshni Chokchi's writing, I love like the treasure hunt aspects of the story, and I really loved the setting of Venice in this book. And while the plot was like not my favorite, and while I do think that this is like a weaker installment than the other ones, I still gave it a full 5 out of 5 stars, and again, the ending was just absolutely perfect. I could not imagine a better like ending to this story. At number 8, I have Rule of Wolves by Leigh Bardugo. This is the second book in the King of Scars duology and also the finale. I also have an entire spoiler-filled reading vlog for this book. I can link both of those videos in the description box below if you are interested. But I love this series. It is like a series in the Grishaverse, and the first book followed Nikolai Lantsov, who was a character you met in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. It also follows Zoyan Ozielensky, who's another character you follow, and Nina Zenik from the Six of Crows duology, and it kind of like blends all their POVs together. And this book picks up right after the explosive ending of King of Scars, and I just absolutely loved this book. I know a lot of people were not the biggest fans, and I do think that this is like, I don't think this is as good as Six of Crows, but I also don't think it's like on the level of Shadow and Bone, so this is kind of like in the middle. I would definitely rank Six of Crows first, then this, then the Shadow and Bone trilogy. But I still think that this was a really great book. I read it in like 2 days. This book was like 600 pages, but I just devoured it. I loved all the characters, and I do think that this was just a really great finale, and the ending of this book left me shook, and I cannot wait to see what Leigh Bardugo does next, whether it's like the next book in the Ninth House series or the next book in like the Grishaverse. But I just absolutely love this book. It made me feel all the emotions, so yeah, loved this one. It was great. At number 7, I have The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Maxey. This is a picture book, kind of, that follows a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse. I know, groundbreaking, I never would have guessed, but I can't really talk about this book because it has no plot, but I cried. It was so good, and I cannot wait to reread it because it just filled me with so much warmth, and I loved it, and it's so heartfelt and beautiful and great. So if you have not read it, what are you doing? It can take like 10 minutes, and it's so good. At number 6, I have kind of one that surprised me, and that is The Midnight Star by Marie Lu. This is the third and final book in the Young Elites trilogy, and oh my god, like, The Young Elites was a fine book. I gave it like 3.5 stars. The Rose Society was good. I gave it like 4 stars. And I read The Midnight Star right after finishing The Rose Society, and I read it in like 1 day because it was just so addicting. I absolutely loved the way that this series wrapped up. Like, I think Behind the Bronzed Beast, this is one of the best like epilogues / endings I've read this year. It was just like I'm speechless. Like, I think about this book and I just like can't believe what Marie Lu did. Like, I had heard that this book wasn't as good as the first 2 from like some people, and also it looked really short, and that's usually a bad sign. But oh my god, like, Marie Lu packed so much into these like 316 pages, and I just like I think about some of the scenes in this book and I just like can't. Like, Marie Lu's writing is so good. The characters in this book are so good. The ending, I can't even talk about it, and the plot was so good, and I loved like the mythology of this world that was introduced. I just can't. It's so good. Like, read the series, please. even if it's just to like get to this last book, because holy crap. Then I have Wishtree by Catherine Applegate. This is another one that took me by surprise. It is a picture, not a picture book, a children's book that follows a red oak named Red, and it's kind of like their life in this town, and it's just so good. Like, it's 200 something pages, but like, I was on the verge of tears. It's so good. Like, I can't even comprehend how good this book was. Like, the idea of telling a book from the perspective of a tree is just like so genius. Like, Catherine Applegate has the mind of a master, and it's just so good. Like, this book is so good, and you can easily read it in like an hour. It's just, it has illustrations, and it's so beautiful, both writing and like illustration wise, and it's so heartwarming and sweet, and I absolutely loved it. Then we have another book that almost made me sob, and that is Lovely War by Julie Berry. This book follows, basically we have Aphrodite, who is on trial by her husband because she was having an affair with the god of war, and she is obviously the goddess of love, and to prove her case, to prove that she is like innocent, I guess, and to like explain why she had an affair, she ends up telling the story of these two couples in World War I, and she kind of has to explain why love and war are eternally drawn to one another. This book left me speechless. It is like so beyond good. Like, I can't even explain it. It just is so beautiful. Like, it is just this slow progression of these characters, and each chapter will leave you like with your mouth open, and like the ending like actually killed me, and it's just so good the way that she weaves in like Aphrodite and Hephaestus, or whatever the heck his name is, and Ares, and even Apollo ends up like coming in, and Hades is like chilling there as well. It's just like so good, and like I love how the story is told, and I love all the characters. Hazel, James, Aubrey, Colette, like they're all so good, and I just can't. So I think the radiator just kicked on, so if you hear a buzzing, just ignore it. I'm still not done gushing about this book. It's just so good. Like, the way that she wrote about such mundane things and made them feel so meaningful, like just getting dinner at a restaurant and like eating pasta, she like made it so beautiful, because you know that in the backdrop of this war, time is so limited, and these small mundane things that we take for granted are so monumental to these characters. And I can't even talk about this. Like, I need to reread this book. I feel like this is a book that you will get more from every single time you read it. And it's just like the bee's knees, okay? Like, just read it. It's so good. Next, I have another book from Miss Tahada Mafi, and that is An Emotion of Great Delight. This book, I read it twice this year. It's so good. Like, I think the writing in this book is like behind This Woven Kingdom, because I do think This Woven Kingdom has just objectively better writing. This is so beautiful. Like, the way Tahada Mafi can just talk about, like, again, mundane things, normal things, is so lyrical. Like, she can literally talk about a tea kettle and you're like weeping at how good the prose is. It's just like, I can't, like, this book okay, I should probably explain what this book is. It follows a girl named Shadi, and it takes place after the US has declared war on Iraq, and Shadi's life is kind of falling apart. Her brother died, I think, yeah, the year before. Her best friend and her are no longer speaking. Her mom is kind of falling apart. Her dad is like gripping to like, he's like between life and death basically, and her sister is kind of just like being mean to her, and it kind of is just like this confluence of like horrible things that are happening to her, and it's just so good. It's so lyrical. Like, this book doesn't really have a plot. It's only like 250 pages or something, but it's just so good. Oh, there's also a romance in this book. Shadi ends up like reacquainting herself with the best friend who she no longer speaks to, her brother, and it kind of is just, it's so good. You get most of the book is told in present day, but you also get flashbacks to like the year before, when all this kind of stuff was happening, and it's so good. You can read it in like a day. I know some people weren't the biggest fan of this book, but I just think it was so beautiful. I do probably like a Very Large Expanse of Sea, which is her Tahada Mafi's other contemporary novel, but I do think that this one is like almost as good. It's just so, like, again, so beautiful. I think that there are a ton of important discussions that are started in this book, and I liked how they weren't wrapped up. Like, this book didn't end with a neat little bow, and I like that because it's just like a few days of this character's life, and it's not anything, like, she's not trying to give a resolution because there is no resolution. You keep growing. You don't just have falling action and then your life is perfect. Like, you're always trying to get better and evolve, and I really liked that aspect of the story. Okay, now we are down to the top 2, and at number 2 I have Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. This is yet another book that I have a full spoiler-filled reading log for. Oh my god, this book, like, it's so good. Like, I really like Cassandra Clare's books, and I really, really love Chain of Gold, but Chain of Iron was just, like, on a whole different level. This book, like, low-key doesn't have any plot, and it's, like, 650 pages, but the character development in this book is so good. Like, Cassandra Clare is so good at character development, and you don't even care that there's no plot going on. Like, there's a murder every, like, 100 pages, maybe, 150, and that's, like, really it, but you kind of just get to spend time with these characters, and again, it's a very slow progression. I found that I like books that are very slow-paced and slow-burning, but deal with a lot of different, like, character interactions and character development, and it's so good. It's probably, like, one of the best middle books in a series I've ever read in my entire life, and I am so upset that we're not going to have the final book, Chain of Thorns, until November. I'm dying to see the cover, but I cannot wait to reread this. I'm going to reread the entire Shadowhunter Chronicles this year, and I can't wait to get to this book before the final book is released. But yeah, this was just so good, and Cassandra Clare's writing, like, improves with every single book that she writes. I think this series is easily her best, and I can't wait to see how it wraps up in November. Okay, and now we are down to my number 1 book of the year, and this and Chain of Iron are, like, pretty tied. But that book is none other than A Sky Beyond the Storm by Sabaa Tahir, the 4th and final installment in the An Ember in the Ashes series. Ember in the Ashes is, like, one of my absolute favorite series of all time. I think it's so good. I love the characters. It is just amazing, and this book was so good. I was so nervous about it because I was like, is Sabaa Tahir really gonna pull through? But she freaking pulled through, okay? Like, I almost wish that I had done a reading vlog for this book to, like, have captured my emotions in the moment. But this book was so good. It was like, there were actual stakes. Like, usually in finales, you're like, everyone's gonna survive and it's all gonna be great. But no, Sabaa Tahir killed like 1,000,009 people in this book, and there were actual bad things happening. You were actually scared, and the war in this book was so good. Like, I know a lot of people said this book was slow. Like, literally when, it was not slow at all for me. Like, I thought all the scenes were so good, and they all had such a purpose, and even when there was, like, low-key nothing happening, like, there were character interactions that were, like, so good and so, like, interesting, and I could honestly read about these characters, like, eating tortilla chips for 500 pages, and I would still probably give it 5 stars. I just think it's so good. Sabaa Tahir's writing is so amazing, and I love the characters in this book. They're some of my favorite in fiction, and I love this world, and I just love the way that this book was written. Like, it was so good. There were so many different things in this book that, like, my brain is just flashing back to right now, and I think it was just definitely my favorite book in the series. I think it was just so amazing, and I cannot wait to reread this series this year, because I just, like, knowing everything that happens in this book, I feel like I just need to start all over again and kind of get the full experience once more, because it's just so amazing. And again, this solidified this series as one of my all-time favorites. So that is it for my favorite books of 2021. If you read any of these books as well, I'd love to know your thoughts. If you also want to cry with me about some of the books that I read, please do so. And if I hope this maybe gave you the incentive to pick up these books, because they're all so fantastic. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what 2022 brings reading-wise. So yeah, that is it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. All my social media links are in the description box below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!